Hi, it's Penny here, and somehow we are already 3/4 of the way through the year, so I wanted to kind of do a little bit of a wrap up of my Q3 reading. I'm going to talk about some of my most favorite books of the quarter, some of the worst books I read, and then try to quickly check in on my reading goals and some stats around that. So we'll start with my favorite books. I'm going to divide these into 3 categories: textbooks, audiobooks, and graphic books. So for textbooks, I actually have 3, one for each month. Firstly, I really enjoyed The Last Murder at the End of the World by Stuart Turton. This is about this island that has survived the apocalypse. Basically everywhere except this island is covered in fog that kills everyone, but this village manages to survive thanks to the skills of these 3 scientists that kind of lead the village. And these scientists are the only people that lived before the apocalypse, and so there's a lot of things the villagers don't know. Then what happens is someone ends up murdered, and because of the AI security system that runs this island, they have a set amount of time to solve the murder, or otherwise the island is going to be overtaken by this fog. Now, I would have expected in the story for the murder to happen quite near the beginning, but actually it doesn't happen till about halfway through the book, even though you know it's coming right from the beginning. And as well as trying to figure out what happened with this murder, you're also trying to figure out some of the other things that are going on the island that don't quite make sense. Personally, I was just so intrigued by everything that was going on the whole time. I loved trying to figure out all the different mysteries. And I also really liked some of the sci-fi ideas that were introduced. I have seen some criticisms that they didn't think the ideas were explored as fully, or that maybe the characters weren't developed as fully. But I think if you just go into this expecting kind of more of a cozy sci-fi mystery, then maybe you're less likely to be disappointed. Anyway, I loved it. Then I also loved Foe by Ian Reid. So this is a story where we have this couple that kind of live out in a more isolated location. Then this guy shows up and he's like, "Congratulations, the husband is going to get to go to space. You've won a lottery." And that seems weird. The whole way he's acting seems weird, and the whole way the couple is reacting to this seems off as well. And then the guy also introduces the idea that when this man goes to space, there's going to be some kind of replacement so that the wife won't be lonely. The whole time you just don't really understand what's going on. You know that there's more going on than you're being told, but you just don't know what it is. And that unknown was something, again, that I just enjoyed trying to figure it out the whole time. And I just really enjoyed that feeling of everything being slightly off. I will admit the middle did drag a little bit. I think it could have been cut down a bit, but I really liked it, and I found the ending to be very satisfying. I definitely think I will reread this at some point because I think it would be a very different experience knowing what's actually going on. And then as well, One for My Enemy by Olivia Blake. I often say that I like Olivia Blake but don't have a lot of evidence for it, but I think this is the evidence for it. Because even though there's a lot that Olivia Blake does that I don't like, and I do think in this one the plot in the middle got very convoluted, the characters and the character interactions and just the philosophy and the vibes, all of that I loved. So this is kind of a Romeo and Juliet retelling. We have these 2 magical crime families, and then there's these secret romances going on between one family which is all daughters and one family that is all sons. And as you would expect from a Romeo and Juliet retelling, there's a lot of tragedy and death and confusion. And I will say this one, I'm not sure I was as satisfied with the ending as I was with the beginning, but I just loved all the characters, and I think I will always look back on this book with fond feelings. Then for audiobooks, I also have 3, although the first 2 are from the same series, which is The Innkeeper Chronicles by Ilona Andrews. So I read books 2 and 3, Sweep and Peace and One Fell Sweep. So this is set in a world where all the supernatural creatures of the world, all those classic supernatural creatures, are actually aliens, and it just happens that Earth is in the middle of this transportation hub, so aliens are always passing through, and they use Earth kind of as a way station, and when they stay on Earth they stay in these inns, and it's the innkeeper's jobs to basically keep the aliens secret from regular humans and also keep the aliens safe, mostly from each other, because there's a lot of political drama going on out in space, it turns out. So these books are kind of sci-fi, fantasy, paranormal, romance, it doesn't matter. Pretty much anything that Ilona Andrews writes, I will enjoy. I love the way they do world building, character development, action, and humor. This series is actually originally published in like a serialized form. So they're very fast paced. There's kind of like always little episodes that all fit together, but each piece kind of gives you a little bit of the story. You never feel like you're kind of lost in filler. And I just like, even though often I would say I don't like action or humor, the way that Ilona Andrews does it in this series especially, I just love it. I've been having so much fun with this series, and I'm nearly finished it actually as of the beginning of October, which has happened between the end of Q3 and when I'm filming now. And I'm kind of sad about being almost finished because I'm just loving it. Then we also have 17 Years Later by J.P. Pomare. So this is a mystery thriller written by a New Zealand author. So the idea is that in the book, 17 years ago, there was this murder where this rich family all turned up stabbed to death, and the chef that they had recently hired gets arrested for this. But 17 years later, this podcaster is going to investigate it because she doesn't believe that he got a fair trial. And I just love the way that J.P. Pomare does mystery thrillers. Like, it's more mystery, but there is a little bit of thrilling elements in there, especially near the end. It kind of builds up to it. There's also like so many different pieces that come together in a really satisfying way that I don't think is too over the top. Like a lot of the time with other thrillers that I read, they're too over the top. It just doesn't really make sense. It isn't believable. Also, they often do unreliable narrators in a way that I find is kind of degrading to women, to be honest. Like, it's always like, oh, she's an alcoholic, so she doesn't actually know what she's doing. Anyway, I hate that. But this book, we have an unreliable narrator, but that is the chef, and you're getting his story that he wrote trying to prove his innocence. But, you know, is he telling the truth? He seems likable, but is he? And that's something I just kept wondering the whole book. Like, throughout this book, I kept coming up with different theories and having to adjust my theories as we got new information. Was very satisfying. Even though it didn't have magic, it's not fantasy, it didn't have cool technology, it's not sci-fi, and normally that wouldn't be my thing, but this one, I still had a really great time. Then lastly, for graphic novels, my favorite thing was a reread, and that is the Descender graphic novel series. So I knew I was going to love this already because I've read it before, but I did really enjoy my reread, and I had forgotten so much. So this is a series where humans have spread out across the universe, and then these giant robots turn up and just kill off a bunch of humans. And in retaliation, the humans then start killing all the robots, even though the humans are very reliable on the robots at this point, so that's kind of dumb. And primarily we're following this young companion robot who has woken up on this moon and his family is missing. So he's trying to track down his family, but also kind of getting involved in this bigger mystery about these giant robots and the ongoing conflict between humans and robots. I love this series, and as I said, I'd forgotten so much, and I do think now I'm going to have to continue on and reread Ascender as well, which is like kind of a spin-off series. Anyway, if you like graphic novels and you haven't read that one, I would definitely recommend it. But now, let's move on to the worst books that I read in the quarter, which I definitely do not recommend. For these ones, I've just picked out one textbook, one audiobook, and one graphic novel. So for the textbook, I'm gonna go with Severance, even though it kind of wasn't that bad, but it really just wasn't what I thought it was going to be based on everything I'd heard about it. So what I had heard is that it is a book about a woman who just keeps going to work even though this pandemic is happening, and it's quite clear that like society is breaking down and she shouldn't be going to work anymore, but she keeps going to work. However, while it was part of the story, most of the story was actually about her backstory, like getting this job and like her family and where they'd come from, and like just her being a new adult trying to figure out how to live life. And I wasn't really interested in any of that part of the story, like not the contemporary elements and not the historical fiction elements, because I don't tend to like books like that normally. There was also another part that was kind of like post-apocalyptic, because this pandemic actually is kind of like a zombie apocalypse, kind of. Anyway, there's kind of this post-apocalyptic section where this group is now trying to travel from New York, where she was working, to somewhere where they think they're going to be safe. And I liked that part of the story, but we really only got like maybe 5 chapters. And as well, that part of the story was where we got the ending, and I thought the ending was incredibly open-ended, and sometimes I can be into an open-ended ending, but this one I just felt really unsatisfied. And then the small part that we got of her continuing to go to work even though society was breaking down, I liked it, and I liked some of the critiques of capitalism and society that were in there. I just wanted more of that part, and this book didn't deliver. So I don't know that I would necessarily say this book was really terrible. I don't know that it will make my worst books of the year list, but it was somewhat disappointing to me because it just wasn't what I thought it was going to be, which is probably true of the audiobook as well. So I've already ranted about this in other places. But The First Binding by R.R. Verde, I gave this 1 star because the plot was so much the same as the plot of The Name of the Wind. We follow this young boy who is orphaned. He has some traumatic events happen. He kind of has to live on the street for a while. Eventually he goes to this magic school where he starts to learn this magic, which in a lot of ways has a lot of similarities with the magic of The Name of the Wind. In fact, I think because of that, R.R. Verde didn't really describe the magic, because it was almost like he was like, oh, you'll already know how it works because you've read The Name of the Wind, right? But basically there was a point where something happened which was so similar to The Name of the Wind. Like, in the beginning, I was willing to overlook a lot of it. I was like, these are classic fantasy tropes. It's very similar, but you know, I can consider it inspired by, but then it got a little bit too close, and I told myself that if another plot point happened, a particular one that was from Name of the Wind, if that continued to happen in The First Binding, I had to give The First Binding 1 star because it was too much of a ripoff, and that is what happened. So it's very disappointing. As well, I will say, The First Binding was very slow-paced, and the writing style, even though it was good, definitely didn't live up to the enjoyment I got from Name of the Wind. So because it was so similar to Name of the Wind, I couldn't help but compare the two, and The First Binding lost that battle. And I don't understand how a book could be that much of a rip-off and still be published. And also, I'm glad that I read this on audiobook because it was a 40-hour audiobook, which was enough of a struggle. But if I had read this physically, I think I would have died when I finally gave it 1 star to know that I put that much time into it. Anyway, then the other worst book on the list here is the graphic novel Phoenix Endsong. So this is a Marvel X-Men comic. I've never really read that many superhero comics, except for when I was younger. My nana's house, there was always like bits of comics spread around the farmhouse, and you would just find like a few pages every now and then and be able to read them, and like maybe over a long period of time you would manage to read a whole story. Anyway, that's a fond memory to look back on, but Phoenix Endsong is not a fond memory to look back on. I just was really surprised how terrible the art was, as well as the story not really being that great. Like, there's some cool ideas with the different superpowers, and Phoenix themselves is a really interesting character, but this was terrible. Like, I don't understand. I'm sure not all superhero X-Men comics can have the art that bad, because surely then no one would read them, right? Anyway, I thought that was terrible. The worst. And I probably won't be picking up any more comics like that, which is kind of what I expected. Okay, now I do also want to quickly check in on my goals and my stats. I say quickly, to be honest, I already filmed this and I talked for way too long, but let's try to actually be to the point. We'll try. My first goal was about the number of books that I wanted to read this year, which is 100 books with a stretch goal of 150. As of the end of September, I have read 144 books, so I think we're going to make the stretch goal. And I think when I've looked at this in the past, I've always looked at kind of also the split of different formats, so text, audio, and graphic novels. And even if I took away the graphic novels, because when I say 100 books, I'm really talking about reading 1 textbook and 1 audiobook every week. So graphic novels are kind of just a thing on the side. But even if I take out the graphic novels, I've already read 81 things, so I should definitely get to that 100 books, even if we're talking about non-graphic books. Then my second reading goal is kind of a goal of 4 parts. I think this is why I always end up talking about this for too long. But basically I have 4 lists of books that I'm trying to get through. The first one is TBR 0. I now only have 1. I can't quite reach it, but 1 more book on my physical TBR, and I do actually have it on my October TBR. And Admittedly, I have put this on several TBRs this year, but it got ruined because I was moving house. Now we have pretty much finished that. I'm still trying to sell my old house, but we finished with the moving activities. So I'm pretty confident I'm going to get to Black God's Drums, the last book on my physical TBR, TBR 0-ish. We'll get to that. TBR 0, that will be very exciting. Then my next list is Series 0. So basically I'm trying to be caught up on every series that I'm reading as much as I can be. Like obviously I can't read books that haven't been released yet. So for this, I only have 10 books that I need to read to be caught up. Some of that is my Cosmere reread, which I'm on track to do because I want to be able to read Wind and Truth in December. There's also, I think, 3 new releases, which mainly I've been struggling to get because of availability, but I am picking up one of them in October. I'm pretty sure the other one is finally being released on audiobook in November. And then the other one is one that was just released very recently. And the only way I'll be able to get my hands on it is to purchase it physically. And I've been trying not to buy books physically because I don't have any money at the moment, so we'll see when I get to that one. And then other than that, it's just the Murderbot books and the Innkeeper Chronicles, both of which I'm going to try and finish in October, but also I only started those this year, so I'm not as worried about completing them. I will admit, in October on my TBR, I've put some new series, which might ruin the whole Series 0 goal, but like, am I ever actually going to be at Series 0 for a significant amount of time, given how many new series I want to start? Probably not. So probably the goal is actually to always be finishing series within a certain amount of time from starting them. I don't know, we'll work that out. The third list I was working on is my Goodreads Want to Read list, so I wanted to get this under 100 books. It is now at 89 books. I think in the first quarter I also was doing really well with this, and I decided to set a stretch goal of 60 books. Delusional. We're not going to worry about that anymore. Just keeping it under 100 I think is pretty good. I have actually been finding this really helpful, even though maybe I'm not getting the list down too much. Having this as a goal means that whenever I go to add a book to this list, I think about, do I really want to read it more than other books on this list? Or is it something that maybe I should just accept I'm never going to have time to get to and I just shouldn't bother adding it to the list? And that's been really helpful because otherwise this list just gets out of control and it just gets really overwhelming. So I'm glad I set this goal. And then my last list was about 2024 releases. Mainly my problem with this has been availability, especially because I've moved to a smaller town now. So my library has a lot less of the new releases that I'm trying to get my hands on. And as well, I have had recently some problems with just the audiobooks. I think they're being released later in Australia and New Zealand. I think that's the problem. So that kind of means I have to wait longer than I think I would. And sometimes it's hard to find out like what is the date. Although admittedly, my other problem with getting through this list has just been about having enough time because I've been more focused on getting through my series. But I'm kind of okay with that priority. And I still think I'm going to get through most of the new releases that I was excited about. Oh, it's raining. Sorry if you can hear that. But I still think I'm going to get through most of the new releases that I'm excited for this year. Hopefully. Not just raining, really windy. Perfect for filming. Anyway, my third goal was about having more favorite books to rave about. So basically I was trying to increase my average ratings. To be honest, things were a little bit up and down in terms of my average ratings in Q3, but in October they're looking up. So I think I'm always optimistic that they're going to go up, and then sometimes they don't. Anyway, if we look at the overall distribution, I wanted to have 5% or less 1 and 2 stars, and I'm close. And I wanted to have 70% 4 and 5 stars, which again, I'm close. I just have, for some reason, a few too many 3 stars. And I think that's just because some of the books that are on my Goodreads Want to Read list are like books I'm hoping to like, but books I'm not sure about. But a lot of the series that I'm hoping to start in Q4 are ones that I'm super hyped for. So hopefully that will bring things up. So as well, I had five tactics for increasing my average ratings. One was that I wanted to read more than 75% adult books. This is one where I'm not quite there. I've got 70%, but I think actually in Q3 that came up because I only read a couple of YA books, both that I was hopeful for, but also wasn't sure about, so maybe I shouldn't have picked them up, but I'm glad I gave them a chance even if they didn't really deliver. They were still only 3 stars, but maybe they're adding to my 3-star problem. I'm trying to think about whether the new series I'm starting in Q4 are adult books. I think they are, so that should help with that. Then also, this is where I admit that when I say TBR 0, I do actually have a bunch of books still unread on my shelves that are the beginnings of new series. And I did a video last year, I think, where I read the first chapter of all of those and decided which ones were priority. And I was hoping to pick a lot of those up this year. I haven't really had much time to do that, except for The First Binding and One Dark Window, both of which I rated very lowly. I only had time to pick those up because I got them on audiobook. And they were meant to be ones I was going to rate highly, so that's a disappointment. But some of the other ones that I actually had prioritized higher but hadn't picked up because I want to read them like physically, I'm hoping to pick some of those up in Q4. So those are the series I'm picking up. So I'm finally going to get to that priority series list. I just didn't want to start it any earlier because I still wanted to work on series 0. So it's like my different lists of books competing against each other for my time. And probably I was just too overly ambitious with my reading goals, as usual. Also, to improve my ratings, I was hoping to do more of those try a chapter videos where I identify these priority series that I think I'm going to really love. I have been doing those. I think when this comes out, it will be just before my third one of those videos. There was kind of a big gap because, again, moving house, which is probably my excuse for any reading goals that I don't meet this year. But anyway, all the books that I've been prioritizing through those, I don't really have time to read because I've still got to work on my other priority series and my series 0. So really those are going to be put aside for next year, probably. I also was planning to DNF anything that I was rating 1 and 2 stars, even though I still rate them 1 and 2 stars. Like if I DNF a book, I still rate it because I still want people to know that I don't think it's an enjoyable book. And I actually failed this in Q3 because I read all of The First Binding, which I gave 1 star, but it's not my fault because it wasn't until right near the end that I confirmed that it was definitely a 1-star book. And before that I was kind of like tossing up between 2 and 3 stars and maybe leaning to the 3-star side of things. Also Phoenix Endsong I gave 1 star, but it was a graphic novel, so it was a quick read and I was reading it for the Magical Readathon, so I wanted to finish it to fulfill the reading prompt. Readathons are sometimes not helpful when you're trying to DNF more. But anyway, I will continue trying to DNF 1 and 2 stars. And then the last thing about increasing my ratings was just not to pick up any memoirs because I don't like them. I know I don't like them. Even if other people rave about them, I don't want to pick them up and I haven't. So yay me. Okay, then lastly, I just have a couple of stats goals. Firstly, I have been trying to read less than 70% white or European authors, and in Q3 I managed to get this down to 66.7 white or European authors. So I actually managed to get it there. I think for the first half of the year I was just writing over 70%, so we've made some nice progress. And then as well I had a goal about genres. I wanted to read more than 10% sci-fi because I always find my reading is like significantly fantasy, and while I like fantasy I also really love sci-fi. Like my love for sci-fi has just grown and grown, and when I look at it, sci-fi books are actually the highest rated at the moment compared to other genres. So I want to read more sci-fi books, and so far at the end of Q3 we're at 19.6% sci-fi. So that has also come up since the middle of the year. So we're winning at that goal as well. So overall I'm doing okay with my reading goals. I think where I'm not meeting them, I have a good reason. I'm not mad about it. Probably I was just over ambitious. Anyway, that is my Q3 wrap-up type thing. Let me know what was the best book that you read in Q3 and what was the worst book. I would love to chat with you about it down in the comments. Let me know if you've read any of the books that I talked about in this video. I'd also love to chat with you about those. Do subscribe if you'd like to see more of my bookish videos. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. I hope that you are doing well, and I will see you next time.